Alhaji Umaru Dikko was born on December 31st, 1936, in a small village of Wamba, close to Zaria in Kaduna State. After schooling in Zaria, he obtained a BSc degree from the University of London. In his younger days, Dikko worked for the BBC Hausa service. He had been the vanguard of Nigerian politics since the 1960s, when, as a promising young politician, he was instrumental in mobilizing northern public opinion against Nigeria's first military government, headed by Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi. Dikko was secretary of the Committee of Northern Politicians that toured the North to build support for the creation of states across the Federation in 1966. He also served as a Commissioner for Finance and Commissioner for Information in the North Central states during the regime of General Gowon. By the time the civilian democratic rule was restored in 1979, Dikko had matured into a seasoned politician. He stood for election to the Senate but was unsuccessful. Despite his election loss, he was appointed transport minister by his brother-in-law, President Shehu Shagari. To the Nigerian public, Umaru Dikko was the ultimate personification of the corruption of the 1980s. Stories of his alleged corruption are legendary. As well as being transport minister, Dikko headed a notorious presidential task force set up to alleviate food shortages by distributing imported rice. The task force was accused of hoarding rice in order to artificially aggravate existing food shortages and drive prices even higher. It was also accused of issuing import licenses to businessmen with connections to the ruling NPN. During Shagari regime, Dikko's name became synonymous with corruption. He was also considered one of the most powerful ministers because he was married to a relative of President Shagari and he had the president's ears.
The Buhari administration was all out to persecute me at all costs and from all angles. It, however, made its mistake by portraying me to the world as a corrupt person, a crook who in government looted the nation's treasury. They made this mistake because they did not know me well. Neither did they know my root or my family tree. If they did, they would have chosen a different propaganda material to discredit me. My attraction in life and in government was and is power. I accepted President Shagari's offer to be a minister because I wanted to exercise power for the benefit of our country and people. It was never because I wanted to make or accumulate money. I am the sixth on the direct line of descendant from Mujaddidi Sheikh Usman Danfodio, the famous Islamic reformer and founder of the Fulani Empire, now called the Caliphate. The blood that runs in me, in my vein, is therefore the blue blood of royalty, Islamic education, and piety. Genetic science is a fact. The family has never been in business of making or hoarding any money. It made its mark in the serious business of governance, religious reformation, and leadership. If General Buhari and his junta had accused me of love of power, they might have been nearer the truth. Alas, they missed the mark. They went on and on and on about an imaginary looting of Nigeria's treasury. Maybe what they would do if they were in my shoes.
He courted controversy in several instances, and he even managed to antagonize his own colleagues in the ruling NPN. He famously clashed with NPN presidential hopeful and philanthropist Moshood Abiola by rebuffing his political ambition. Dikko made himself unpopular not just with the public and his colleagues, but also with military officers. He kept tab on senior officers by ordering covert surveillance on them. This was a dangerous game to play, given that the senior echelons of military officer corps were highly politicized and loaded with officers with significant coup plotting experience. Among such officers was the no-nonsense GOC of the 3rd Armored Division in Jos, Major General Muhammadu Buhari. Buhari complained to President Shagari that Dikko had ordered his movement to be monitored. When Shagari raised the issue with Dikko, Dikko did not deny the accusation, but he simply warned Shagari that Buhari could not be trusted and should be retired. Dikko had stepped on big toes and his days of reckoning lay ahead.
Now, I want to devote a paragraph or two to the kind of relationship that had existed between Buhari and myself prior to his becoming the head of state. It may help to explain more in the interest of greater clarity. At one stage, General Buhari and myself hailed from the same state, Kaduna State, comprising of Kaduna and Zaria provinces. He came from Daura, which was part of Kaduna province, and I from Zaria side. There was hostility between the two sides, demanding separation so that Kaduna would go and leave Zaria alone. Kaduna, especially Daura, did not favor the separation through creation of a new state. Buhari disliked this intensely, and for that reason disliked me. The second reason for my falling out with General Buhari was my comment on his unruly behavior and insubordination when he led Nigerian troops to Chad as part of Nigeria's contribution to UN peacekeeping operation. Buhari became disrespectful to his military superiors and once engaged in open argument with Professor Ishai Audu, the then Nigeria's foreign minister. General Buhari, in short, was becoming a politician in uniform.
Other actions taken by Dikko to antagonize the military included ordering the closure of all jetties that were being used for smuggling. One of the jetties was owned by former army chief and strongman Lieutenant General Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma. The October 1983 presidential election, won by President Shehu Shagari, was marred by accusations of massive electoral malpractice. Shagari's election campaign was managed by his brother-in-law Umaru Dikko. When the civilian government was toppled on New Year's Eve in a military coup, the new head of state, Major General Buhari, in his first broadcast, warned that his regime would ensure that corrupt officials and their agents would be brought to book. That and Dikko's previous antagonizing of military officers placed Dikko in the crosshairs of the new regime. Soon after the coup, armed soldiers went to look for him at his official quarters in Ikoyi. His family was also harassed by the military authorities. With the assistance of friends and a fistful of cash, Dikko drove to Nigeria's border with the Republic of Benin. Bribing his way through the border, he traveled to Lomé and from there boarded a flight to London. London had become a safe haven for former government ministers as the new regime continued to detain, try and jail deposed politicians for massive corruption. Dikko joined a host of other distinguished Nigerian fugitives, such as Adisa Akinloye, national chairman of the NPN, Joseph Wires, former Senate president, and Richard Akinloye, former Attorney General and Minister of Justice of the deposed Shagari government. Dikko became an outspoken critic of the new military regime and launched continued verbal attacks on it. He appeared on British television and granted interviews which condemned the Buhari regime. Dikko was making a bad situation worse, and he quickly became the top name on Nigeria's most wanted lists. Based on Dikko's confrontation with the military and the allegations of massive corruption against him, the new regime was determined to bring him home for a show trial that would boost his popularity. Although Nigeria and Israel did not officially have diplomatic relations with each other, they conducted business deals out of public sight. Nigeria supplied more than 50% of Israel's crude oil in exchange for military hardware. In his book on the Israeli agency Mossad, author Gordon Thomas claimed that Israel Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir was concerned that the new Nigerian regime might interrupt Israel's oil supply from Nigeria. According to Thomas, Israel saw an opening to gain favor with the new regime when Nigeria began to arrest leading politicians from the former government for corruption. With Dikko still at large and the Nigerian government unaware of his whereabouts, Israel offered to track down Dikko using the formidable resources of Mossad. Several senior officers in the Nigerian army also had long-standing relationships with Israeli businessmen and security agents. Although oil supply was a motivating factor for Israel, a more plausible scenario is that the new military regime solicited the intervention of Mossad through its network of contacts with the Israeli security establishments. In an interview with the Sun newspaper, Buhari's former ADC, Major Mustafa Haruna Jakolo, claimed that the Israeli involvement in Dikko's kidnap was orchestrated through Lieutenant General T.Y. Danjuma. By the 1980s, Mossad had evolved into the most sophisticated and feared covert intelligence agency in the world, and its exploits were legendary. Its notable successes included the famous capture of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, who was tracked by Mossad to Argentina, where he had been living under another identity. In a daring operation, Mossad captured him on May 11, 1960, and smuggled him to Israel, where he was tried and executed. Mossad had also carried out the spectacular car bomb assassination of the Red Prince, Ali Hassan Salameh, who was the head of Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's security outfits. Salameh was accused of being the mastermind behind the Black September massacre of Israeli Olympic athletes during the 1972 Olympic Games in Germany. The operation to capture Dikko from his London hideout and bring him home to face trial was hatched by the Office of the Head of State in liaison with the National Security Organization and Israelis. The plans were assembled by a small team and were shrouded in utmost secrecy. The same modus operandi used in the capture of Eichmann would be used in the planned capture of Umaru Dikko. It will take months of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and a great deal of bravado to carry out the operation. The key actors in the plot were Alexander Barak, a 27-year-old Israeli from the coastal town of Netanya. He did his military service at the military boarding school in Tel Aviv and worked as a photographer for the Israeli Intelligence Corps. Dr. Levi Ari Shapiro, a 43-year-old Russian-born Israeli national. He was a consultant and a director of the intensive care unit at Hasharon Hospital in Tel Aviv. He was recruited into the plot by Barak, who gave him money to purchase anesthetics which would be used to stupefy Dikko, and Felix Mossad Abitol, 31-year-old Tunisian-born Israeli national. The federal military government also appointed an Air Force officer, Group Captain Bernard Banfa, as the new managing director of the government-owned airline Nigeria Airways. Mossad foot soldiers across Europe were put on alert and memorized Dikko's image and physical description. Doctors were told to be vigilant in case Dikko came in for plastic surgery to change his appearance. Lookouts were placed at his favorite hotels and clerks at car rental companies, and airlines were on the lookout in case he rented a car or bought a plane ticket. Tailors were given his measurements and shoemakers were given his shoe size details of his customized clothes. Dikko was up against a formidable intelligence machinery. The arrest team initially tried to lure Dikko out of hiding by inviting him for a television interview in Paris with US network CBS. Barak adopted the alias Michael Perron and posed as an American television producer, but Dikko became suspicious and refused to be interviewed. So Mossad agents set up base in London along with a retired Nigerian army officer, Major Mohammed Ahmadu Jafar Yusufu. Two separate groups of undercover agents worked underground among London's Nigerian community. The search was narrowed to West London, where many Nigerian officials had opulent residences purchased with embezzled Nigerian state funds. The Dikko trace seemed to be running cold until a chance encounter. On June 30th, 1984, a Mossad agent spotted a man fitting Dikko's description in London's wealthy Bayswater neighborhood. The agent covertly followed Dikko on foot to a house at 49 Porchester Terrace. For several days, the house was continuously watched by the agents and Dikko's routine and movements were noted. On July 4th, 1984, an empty Nigeria Airways Boeing 707 cargo plane flew from Lagos, landed at Stansted Airport in Essex. The UK authorities were informed that the plane had come to collect diplomatic baggage from the Nigerian High Commission, London. Several Nigerian security officials were aboard the plane and had orders not to leave the airport. The plane was parked at a cargo area out of sight of the passenger terminal. Meanwhile, Major Yusufu hired a van, which would be used to convey Dikko once he had been captured. The next day, Yusufu drove the van and parked outside Dikko's house on Porchester Terrace. With Yusufu in the van were Barak, Shapiro, and Abitol. Meanwhile, back at Stansted Airport, the captain of the Nigerian Airways plane filed a departure time of 3 p.m. and claimed that on its way back to Nigeria, the plane would be carrying documentation for the Nigerian Ministry of External Affairs. Diplomatic immunity was claimed for this documentation. Shortly after midday, Dikko emerged from his house for an interview with a Ghanaian journalist. As Dikko walked, two men burst out of the van parked outside his house, grabbed him and forced him into the back of the van. Within seconds, the van doors were closed and the van sped away at breakneck speed. Quick, surgical and precise, it was a typical Mossad operation. Inside the van, Dikko was dumped on his back and handcuffed. At a predetermined rendezvous point, Dikko was transferred to a waiting lorry. Dr. Shapiro went to work and injected Dikko with a powerful respiratory depressant to induce unconsciousness. However, there was a hitch in the operation. Dikko's secretary, Elizabeth Hayes, witnessed Dikko being bundled into the van. The astonished secretary quickly alerted the authorities on the incredible incident she had just witnessed. Given Dikko's profile as a former Nigerian minister, the call was quickly escalated. Officers from Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist squad were placed on alert. Within minutes, police had arrived at the scene and sealed off the quarter-mile radius around Portchester Square. The UK Foreign Office and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher were also informed. All customs officials at airports, seaports, and border crossings were told to be extra vigilant with regards to Nigeria-bound vessels. By mid-afternoon on July 5, 1984, Umaru Dikko had been anesthetized into unconsciousness by Shapiro and locked into a crate. However, at Stansted, there was no visible sign of Dikko, Shapiro, Abithor, or Barak. Instead, around 4 p.m., a white lorry ferried two crates to the airport. Two black Mercedes-Benz cars bearing the Nigerian diplomatic plate number escorted the lorry. The two crates labeled diplomatic baggage and addressed to the Nigerian Ministry of External Affairs in Lagos were unloaded from the lorry by forklift truck and placed in the customs shed to await loading onto the plane. They were accompanied by Major Yusufu and a member of the Nigerian High Commission in London named Okon Edet. Having been warned by the security forces to be wary, custom officers were unusually inquisitive and vigilant. A customs officer named Charles Morrow noticed an unusual medical smell and noise emanating from the crates. On the pretext that the crates did not have the correct official seal, Morrow insisted on a close inspection of them. He called the police, instructed the handling agents of Service Air not to load the crates onto the plane, and Service Air staff were instructed to move away while the police made their way. When the police arrived, armed officers surrounded the Boeing 707 on the tarmac, and other officers made their way to the cargo shed to open the crates. Major Yusufu protested furiously that the crates were protected by diplomatic immunity and could not be searched. His vehement protests were dismissed and police opened the crates with a crowbar. What they found inside was shocking. In the first crate was a bound Dikko with his torso bare. His captors had shoved an endotracheal tube into his throat to prevent him from choking on his own vomit when he was unconscious. Beside him was Shapiro, brandishing syringes and a supply of additional anesthetic to administer to Dikko if the need arose. Dikko was immediately rescued and rushed to a hospital. He regained consciousness the following day after having been unconscious for over 36 hours. He awoke totally oblivious of the preceding drama and his dramatic rescue and received treatment at the hospital under heavy police guard. Britain reacted firmly to the kidnap attempt on its soil. It regarded the involvement of Nigerian security agents in the commission of a crime within its borders as a hostile act of the highest magnitude. The Nigerian government denied any involvement, and the Nigerian High Commissioner, Major General Haladu Hanania, claimed that the incident was the work of some patriotic friends of Nigeria. The Nigerian Airways 707 was detained by the police and was not permitted to take off. 17 people were also arrested on the suspicion of complicity in Dikko's kidnap. Nigeria retaliated swiftly by ordering a British Caledonian Boeing 747 flight that took off 45 minutes ago from Lagos to return for security reasons. The plane's 222 passengers were allowed to disembark and leave the airport, but the plane was held. This led to a day-long standoff between Britain and Nigeria until Britain released the Nigerian 707 plane, and Nigeria eventually released the British Caledonian plane, but the damage had already been done, and diplomatic relations between the two countries became badly strained. The fallout from the crisis led to a 2-year suspension diplomatic relations between Nigeria and Britain. The rule of Mossad, the Nigerian government, and the NSO were never admitted by either of the Nigerian or Israeli governments. With the presence of Nigerian diplomatic passports and cars, the British police expanded the scope of their investigation and asked Nigeria to waive diplomatic immunity for its High Commission staff so they could be interrogated. 2 members of the Nigerian High Commission staff were arrested, and there was talk of calling High Commissioner Hanania for questioning. Outraged by the treatment of its officials, the Nigerian government recalled Hanania to Lagos for consultation. The British Foreign Secretary went a step further and ordered the expulsion of the 2 staff of the Nigerian High Commission who had been arrested as part of the investigation. 4 of the 17 suspects were tried at London's famous Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey and were sentenced to various jail terms ranging from 10 to 14 years. After recovering, Dikko remained in London for another 11 years. He was confined at home under police guard for a year. Umaru Dikko was eventually invited back to Nigeria in 1995 by the military government of Sani Abacha. Dikko remained bitter and in 2001 took his claim to the Human Rights Violation Commission, where he reconciled with General T.Y. Danjuma during the commission's proceedings. Umaru Dikko passed away on July 1, 2014 in London at the age of 77. Next time on My Fellow Nigerians.
Lieutenant General D.O.D.A. Charge 1, treason, finding guilty. Charge 2, conspiracy to commit treason, finding guilty. Major General A.K. Adisa, Charge 1, treason, guilty. Charge 2, conspiracy to commit treason, finding guilty.